All right, welcome back to another edition of the Scarlet and Gray Report podcast. My name is Colin Gay. I'm obviously the managing editor of this website, and we have some very special guest. So you're going to get a comment from me on the board here soon, and you probably have already seen it if you're listening to this or watching this. But we have a new recruiting reporter. Eric Lammers, our original recruiting guy, is off to the national beat. He will still be around, and we're excited to have him more on a national scale. But today I'm proud to introduce Zack Carpenter. You might know him from his time at Letterman Row, his time at 11 Warriors, but now he is our main recruiting reporter. How's it going, Zack?
Pretty good, man. I'm excited to jump on board. Yeah, I worked for a year and a half at 11 Warriors and then a little less than a year at Letterman Row. So about 2.5 years doing this as Ohio State recruiting writer, and just, excited to come on board and get rolling here today.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And we're excited to have you. So we had gone through this and we had talked a little bit about this before, but I kind of wanted to this is the best way, at least for, me and for all of us to get to know you a little bit. I just had a couple of just easier questions, and I kind of wanted to start with, and this doesn't have to be Ohio State related, but who's the best recruit you have ever seen or watched in person, covered in person, talked to? Who impressed you the most?
Yeah, and just in the sake of full clarity, you did send me some of the questions you're going to ask, and because I wanted to think about them, and I put some time and effort into thinking about this, and wrote some names down. I'm thinking there's so many of them. I mean, over 2.5 years, you talk to over 100 athletes. I mean,
Yep.
Hundreds of athletes, and see plenty of them in the camp settings and games. I mean, on film, just sticking with Ohio State, Travion Henderson's the best player I saw at the high school level on film, because I never got to see him play in person until he actually came to Ohio State. And it was just the way he moves. It's like he was gliding every clip I saw of him. I mean, and it was the first film that I saw of him. It was like 8 minutes of like long, explosive 60, 70-yard touchdowns.
Yeah.
And he has had that straight line speed and explosiveness, but he's also able to combine it with his quick feet, because like I said, it was like he was gliding, and like he was barely picking his feet off the ground when he was making his jump cuts and his lateral movement. So he was one. I mean, he was the best running back I've seen on film. But and then when I'm looking at Ohio State in person, the best player I've seen was I think I would go with CJ Hicks, because I mean, that's an easy, obvious answer, but
Sure.
He's just I saw him evolve and grow from being sort of this. I always like to tell people this story. He was 15 when I first saw him in person. Like he wasn't a string bean or anything like that, but he was thinner. He didn't have much muscle to him. And then he put in the time and the effort and really thickened out. And he turned himself into a 5-star player and like top 10, top 15 player in the country. He's brings some nastiness. He brings that physicality, like classic linebacker in terms of his playing style, and he also the pass rushing moves that he has, just being a explosive guy off the edge, that's going to be something that Ohio State's going to have as just one of those explosive defensive playmakers, but he's also able to, he eventually got a lot better too at combining that with versatility as a pass coverage. I mean, seeing him at different camps, like the opening in July last summer when I saw him, he's able to man up against tight ends. He was going up against a couple 4-star tight ends while he was out there, and he was able to press coverage against those type of players. And he's also gotten pretty adept at off coverage, going up against those type of talents. So those two, maybe they sound like obvious answers, but sometimes obvious and cliche is there for a reason. I would go with those two guys.
And I mean, we've seen Travion Henderson kind of quickly adapt to the college level and kind of step up into that role. And at least from what you've said about CJ Hicks, it seems like just over the course of this past year, it seems like, I mean, ever since he's been committed to Ohio State, it seems like he's been kind of just evolving as this player, and not kind of satisfied by this standard of, okay, I'm an Ohio State commit. I'm set, it seems like he's kind of taken this and embraced this concept of, okay, I'm going to grow from here. And I think, just to hear that story, that process, that growth process that he's had, for Ohio State fans, that should be just to make you feel ecstatic, because there is high expectations with this kid. But he also, there's really not a player from my end, and in my opinion, that kind of may represent what the 22 class has in terms of potential. That might, just because he knows the class so well, just because he's an in-state guy. But I'm curious about, does CJ Hicks kind of represent, or is there another player that you would say represents this kind of overall theme of what the Ohio State recruiting class was here for 2022?
Yeah, so it, sort of a point I hadn't thought about that while you're talking there, is, he was the leader of the class. He was the face of the class. They nicknamed him Captain Buckeye and everything. And as a peer recruiting in the 2021 class and the 2022 class, like nationwide, peer recruiting has become a lot more prominent and bigger deal than it ever was. And you hear Ryan Day talk about that all the time. So the fact that he's representative of the Ohio State class and being that that class leader, face of the class, and also sort of setting that bar, and with the way recruiting landscape has shifted. And so that's one reason that CJ would represent the 22 class for Ohio State. But also, this class was riddled with defensive talent up and down. Think about Sonny Styles, CJ, Gabe Powers, Jair Brown, Caden Curry, Hero Canoe, like all these defensive stars. And the 21 class to me was dominated by offense. You had the offensive star power with Travion Henderson, Emeka Ibuka, Donovan Jackson as an offensive lineman. And you also had and Marvin Harrison Jr., then Quinn Ewers when he reclassified, and Kyle McCord as 5-star quarterback. So that was an offensive heavy class. And the 22 class, I think, especially at defensive line and linebacker, maybe the secondary isn't lined with high profile stars or anything, but I do think that like going back to your original point, was that CJ is definitely representative of what this class was all about, what sort of formed here in the end.
Is there, I don't know, you mentioned peer recruiting, and I even see that. We were both at Luke Montgomery's commitment ceremony, and you saw a guy who, from the moment that he put on Ohio State's hat, that was the topic of conversation, whether it was to his brother behind him or whether it was to the rest of the 23 class. You saw this guy that's like, I'm going to Ohio State and you all are coming with me. Like it didn't matter. Like, he wants the best for the program. And it seems like you're right. I haven't been back on the beat for super long, but in terms of the recruiting landscape and kind of the overall storyline, if you were going to take it, it is kind of these young people, these juniors and seniors in high school, kind of taking control of what they want their time in college to be like. And I guess we're kind of jumping around here, but do you feel like that's a positive for recruiting as a whole? Is that kind of like I don't know, like, is that something that you see continuing, or is this kind of just a phase?
No, I think this is going to be a mainstay for a long time. Well, first of all, it's obviously, it's a great thing, because like the phrase goes, dogs want to play with dogs, like stars want to play with stars. And the number one reason that most of these players pick Ohio State is because they see it as that's the best way for them to develop into NFL players. And one of the sort of the caveat with that, or not caveat, but like an extra positive with that, is they always say pros in practice. We're going up against, during the 3, 4, 5 years they're here, they're going up against fellow pros in practice every day, and then down the line on Saturdays too. So they're getting if the more stars you surround yourself with, the better prepared they're going to be to make it to the NFL. And then the number two reason is these kids want to win multiple national championships. Those are the lofty goals they always set. So it only makes sense that you're going to want to surround yourself with star players in that aspect.
And when you talk about like a national brand, I mean, there's nothing bigger. And even when I was talking with Clint Cosgrove, our national, our one of our national guys a couple of weeks ago, he was talking about how just the brand of Ohio State is like uncomparable. Like I mean, it's them, it's USC, it's Georgia, Bama, like these bigger programs that you could be anywhere in the country, and it's Ohio State. But I'm curious, in your opinion, about what that brand had gotten Ohio State this year. Why, I was specifically in the 2022 class. Is there a position or a position on the field or from the 22 class that you're like, this position is in really, really good shape moving forward just because of what this class did?
Yeah, I mean, that question has two pretty obvious answers as well. I mean, it's quarterback and receiver. You have the best, if not the best, one of the best talent developers of the position in Ryan Day, and best play caller. So he's been able to prove it over the course of time that he is a quarterback developer, and to continually bring in these 5-star guys, whether it's CJ or borderline 5-star guys, CJ Stroud, Kyle McCord, Quinn Ewers, Devin Brown, keep bringing them in. I don't see that trend ending anytime soon with Ryan Day bringing in just the top tier blue chip guys at that position. And then receiver, it's the same way, where Brian Hartline is pretty much inarguably the best receiver or recruiter in the country as a receivers coach, and also one of, if not the best, at developing receiver talent when they're actually here. I mean, then you look at those guys. You got Mecca Buka, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., and the 22 class with Keon Grays, Caleb Burton, and Caleb Brown, and Kojo Antwi. And I don't see that ending anytime soon either. As long as those two guys are in place at Ohio State, that trend's just going to keep going up and up and continuing.
Is there a position, whether it was from 22 or I don't know, like, is there a position where you're like heading out of the 2022 class or heading into 2023, you're like, they need to make some noise. There's a couple of holes. There's something still to prove, like recruiting this particular position, or maybe there's not. I mean, Ohio State is a national brand after all.
Yeah, no, I think the two clear answers there as well are offensive line and defensive back. And offensive line, especially offensive tackle mainly, is the one that Ohio State readers and fans are always, I wouldn't even say up in arms, but more disappointed with how things have been going there. And with offensive line recruiting, and like I said, tackle especially, we're in a very exciting time of, you have Justin Fry coming in, and he's proven himself so far already as a recruiter, just with all the guys I talked to, and then him being able to lock down Luke Montgomery's commitment. So I think that's the one where there's room for improvement.
Yeah,
no doubt about it. But I do think that it's shaping up for them to be in a good spot there. But we still have to wait and see on Justin Fry. And it's a wait and see mode too with defensive back, because you have Perry Eliano and Tim Walton now coming in. And again, from the things I've heard, positive recruiters, and likable guys, and great evaluators and developers of talent. But we are still going to have to see that sort of play out. And especially at defensive back in the 22 class, they had their two highest ranked 5-star prospects, and Jaheim Singletary and Terrence Brooks. They both decommitted and or flipped. Terrence Brooks at the last minute during the early signing period. And then the guys they brought in, like Jair Brown, Ryan Turner, Kai Stokes, it's not that those guys aren't great talents and that they bring something to the table. I mean, I think Kai Stokes could wind up being a potential star, even though he was only like a 3-star and ranked in like the 200s or whatever it wound up finishing as. But anyway, the fact that is the talent that the players they didn't get at defensive back that I think is why there's room for improvement. And then we're going to see if these guys can do what like with Tim Walton, if he can do what Kerry Combs did and prove himself as a recruiter and continue bringing talent into the program.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going to go next, is because it's almost, especially on the defensive side of the ball, we talk about, I mean, Justin Fry has a lot of work to do. And I mean, but there's already been some answers with, Luke Montgomery, and there's still targets to go, but there's a lot still to go for the defensive recruiting. And I'm curious, I mean, from the guys that I've talked to, whether it's, Luke Montgomery through, talking about how his next target is Lakota East's Malik Hartford, and how Malik has already had, key relationships and got to know Perry Eliano from Cincinnati and things like that. And then you have Daniel Harris, who I talked to not too long ago, who was like, Perry Eliano was one of his main recruiters there too, and kind of flipping him getting offered by Ohio State, their relationship never really changed at all. What kind of feedback have you gotten from recruits about, say, and through all that, we haven't even talked about Jim Knowles, who's kind of made his own impact on this recruiting trail. I mean, I just a couple of days ago talked to Tackett Curtis, excuse me, and about his relationship with Jim Knowles and how strong that is. And it seems like they're all kind of making this impact. They're joining the Ohio State brand, but kind of continuing what they brought in from elsewhere. Now, Tim Walton is obviously different than that, but what have you seen? What have you heard from recruits about these new coaches, and how are they kind of, getting into and representing the brand that is Ohio State?
Right. And then you talk about that brand of Ohio State, the Block O, that helps a lot when you're able to walk into high schools and be around players, their families and coaches, and have that the power of that brand behind them. But you also have to put in the work. I mean, we saw it with some of the position coaches at Ohio State that recruiting wasn't necessarily their cup of tea. And so far from everything I've heard is that these guys are hitting the ground running. I mean, we not only did we see that on Twitter throughout January when the coaches all hit the trail. I mean, those guys hit the ground running. They were all over the place. Justin Fry was recruiting and talking with Luke Montgomery and Josh Padilla when he was still hadn't even moved to Columbus yet. He was he was still from his California home when he first was introduced to Luke. And it's sort of the same thing where these guys, so far, their reputation is they're personable, likable guys, like sort of easy to talk to type of people. And that's, I mean, I think it's monumentally important, but they're also they're still in that stage, that infant stage of the relationship building process, where it's sort of a feel each other out, get to know them, and then kind of go from there. It might take a little while for those relationships to bear out and be fruitful. But I'm also hearing that these guys know football, obviously. I mean, they just got hired by Ohio State, so they're obviously going to know football. But through those conversations, their comfort level with them is just sort of a person-to-person interaction, and personality-wise, those have been going well so far, and those are still growing. And then as a talent developer and actually being able to teach the position, teach techniques, and go through film, those have been that's been just as important throughout this early stages. And they're hitting home runs in that category too.
Absolutely. And I think when you talk about the new hires, and we've, if you guys have been around on our site for, the past few months, these stories, whether it's, at Pickerington Central, Jim Knowles sitting with CJ Hicks, sitting with Sonny Styles' family as he plays basketball, getting to know that family kind of in the trenches there, recruiting, getting to know the guys that are already committed, but he kind of needs to establish those relationships with. Or it's Justin Fry, who he was, in the days after he was hired in Columbus, he was already in Findlay for a basketball game with Ryan Day and Corey Dennis, looking at Ryan and Luke Montgomery. These guys that, from the start, at least for Justin Fry especially, you have this guy who he doesn't really need to talk about himself. Yes, he needs to talk about how he can develop tackles and develop technique, and he has a certain style and had a lot of success with Chip Kelly at UCLA. But all he has to do, and one of his main recruiting points that I've heard is just point to the head guy, because he's worked with the head guy. He knows he knows what Ryan Day expects. He knows what it was like to work under Ryan Day already, whether it was at Temple or Boston College. You got that's all that he has to do. That's all that he just has to point to. I know Ryan Day. I know what he can do, and this is what you can do with me, with him. So I think that's got to help a lot.
And yeah, not to cut you off, but that's been Ryan Day's MO since he took over as head coach. Assistant coaches leave every single year pretty much, and if it's a revolving door, Ryan Day has made it a point to get in on the recruitments of these players as soon as possible, and not just be a guy who comes in at the very end. And sort of both approaches have worked. That obviously worked tremendously with Urban Meyer as a closer, but Ryan Day's doing it different. And like I said, that's sort of the strategy, is get to know, and it's not like that everywhere. I mean, I think Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley are just two off the bat that are very at the forefront of players recruitment from pretty much before they offer, and then when they do, just for exactly that reason.
Do you think, and this isn't, this is just kind of off the cuff, but I mean, does it help that both were assistant coaches? I mean, kind of came up and was kind of charged with that, whether it was Lincoln Riley with Bob Stoops or Ryan Day under, Urban Meyer. Like, I mean, was that kind of, that's what they were used to, so they kind of applied that different mentality under, like, when they became head coaches, do you think? Or
I mean, probably. I mean, I've never thought of it like that before, but I mean, as an assistant coach, like 90%, if not 100% of your job, I mean, for doing percentages, 90% of it's recruiting, because that's the lifeblood of any program. So I imagine it would, because then you act like if you don't like recruiting, you have to fall in love with it. You at least have to put in the effort. So I imagine, that their experiences as assistants coming up and grinding like that, and learning how to build really like actual solid relationships, genuine relationships with those players when they're during their younger career days. Yeah, imagine it would be a tremendous help. Because
I mean, I just remember from my days covering the Urban Meyer Ohio State era, like, I mean, that's what was the forefront. Like, you're right, Urban Meyer's going to close the door. If you're meeting Urban Meyer, you're like, you're sold, at least when you talk to recruits in that way. But kind of Ryan Day has developed a little bit more of that, I don't want to say, this is a bad word for it, but personable kind of approach recruiting, and being that kind of guy throughout the entire process, talking to kids and kind of closing the door that way. But I guess let's go back to 2023. So what storylines or what questions do you have as Ohio State? They've been on the trail in 2023 for a while. They've been kind of on that focus. They already have a few commits. Is there any questions at this point in the cycle that you're like, this is what Ohio State needs to answer. This is kind of where I need them to go to bring success and to kind of carry the momentum from 2022?
Yeah, the two biggest ones are ones that we've already hit on, so I don't have to dive too far into them. Is the new coaches, how they're going to fare, offensive line recruiting, especially offensive tackle. That's I think those are the two biggest questions. But one that I'm very curious about too is quarterback recruiting, because Ryan Day has made it, it's part of his MO, just as it is with getting in on these recruitments from as early as possible in most cases. It's also his MO that he's made it very clear that he wants to bring in an elite level guy every single class. I mean, you see, like, Clemson has had the strategy now for years of every other class. They'll bring in a 5-star one class and a 3-star developmental guy in the next class. But Ryan Day doesn't want to do that. And part of his point is, like, it's almost a crapshoot. Like, he's like, even I don't know if these guys are going to pan out and develop the way that we want them to, even if they do take to the teaching. So that's what I'm curious about, is you are going to have, you're going to have 2 5-star, borderline 5-stars, and Kyle McCord and Devin Brown. So in the 23 class, is he going to make a push for another guy like a Nico Iamaleava? Or is he going to maybe look to hit the transfer portal instead to find another quarterback, or bring in a developmental guy in the 23 class and sort of shift the focus to the 24 class of getting that next guy, that next dude at quarterback? And the other one is the dead period. The dead period ended Monday. So from Tuesday, March 1st through April 14th, the visits are opening back up. So we're gonna see an influx of tons of guys coming to visit Ohio State. And spring is sort of that time in the past. And I know in the 21 and 22 classes for Ohio State, that's when the class really started filling up and guys locked in their spots. So during that 21 class, or in March 2020, April range, there was like 6 or 7 commitments. It was just an influx of them. So I'm curious to see after this next month and a half of visits, if then that's when we start seeing Ohio State gain momentum and see this class jump from 5 to into double digits or something like that. So I think that's more of a short-term question of what's going to be like these next few weeks versus the quarterback bigger picture.
Do you, and I'm curious, I guess maybe it is kind of a focus on this short term because of, I don't think Ohio State's going to find, like, it's not going to answer its quarterback question in the spring, I wouldn't think, especially in 2023. That seems kind of like a longer term thing. But I'm curious, as this, and I'm not going to ask you, I'm not going to ask you who's going to be the next commitment because that is unfair. But I'm curious about is there a guy on your radar or a player that you're like, okay, I want to see what he does, whether he's been offered from Ohio State or not. You're like, okay, this guy is on Ohio State's radar. His decision could kind of bring some noise. Is there a guy that's kind of you're focused on, or that people need to know about heading into this kind of, as the dead period ends? We're recording Monday, but today, do you feel like, is there one guy that kind of represents kind of that shift? Or
well, the star guy that would really make it would be like a splash, would be AJ Harris. I know he originally had commitment dates set for January, and then he decided to back off of that. But he wouldn't be as splashy, but I'm very curious to what Malik Hartford, his timeline is going to be, because he's the in-state guy out of Lakota West, teammate Jair Brown and Tegra Shabola. So I think he's locked in. I can't remember the exact date, but he's locked in for a visit, and I'm curious to see, okay, is he gonna say, okay, I'm ready, like it's time.
Yeah.
So he's the one that really sort of stands out to me in terms of I'm not all predicting that he's the next commitment.
Yeah.
But he's one guy that I'm sort of zeroed in on over these next few weeks.
And I guess finally, because there's going to be so much more to talk about here in the next few weeks, we just kind of wanted to get before. It's kind of a perfect time that you're coming on, on staff here, because as the dead period kind of is over, visits are happening, commitments, top 5s, top 10s, top 30s are going to come out here soon. But I'm curious, is there, I don't know, is there one player that's currently committed to Ohio State where you're like, okay, this guy, and I think I already know the answer here, but is there one guy who's going to be like, yeah, he's going to take charge, he's going to be the leader of this class, he's going to kind of take the role of, say, I think, it was like CJ Hicks, and in a way, elsewhere it was kind of Keon Grays, you got Gabe Powers in that too. Is there a guy that you're like, okay, he's going to play a huge role here in the next few months of kind of, making this class the top tier that Ohio State is used to?
Yeah, I'm not going to bury the lead. It's Luke Montgomery, and I guarantee that's who you were thinking of as well. It's just Ohio State, Justin Fry being able to sort of put the finishing touches on that recruitment was huge for many reasons. He's a blue chip talent and the talent and the versatility of Luke, where he can play on the interior potentially as an offensive tackle. So a great talent and potential at probably the number one position of need. You're able to lock down and not let him lead the state, and not let Michigan or Notre Dame or Clemson come in and sort of steal him right from your backyard. So those are some of the big reasons why that was such a big win for Fry to start off with. Yeah, and the momentum of bringing in a new offensive line coach, and immediately he pretty much instantly gets a big win on the recruiting trail. But also, It's like you said, when you're asking me about who could be the face of the class, he has the dynamic personality, Luke does, to be exactly that. I mean, and he's been going on visits all last summer, all throughout the fall. So he's building more connections, face-to-face connections with elite level talent from all over the country. And he's building his Rolodex. And the fact that he now is out there, you see him on Twitter and Instagram, trying to convince guys like AJ Harris to come to Ohio State. So he's the next Jack Sawyer. He's the next CJ Hicks as a class leader. We got to come up with a good nickname for Luke, though. I mean, Cool Hand Luke just came to my mind. That's a little cliche, and maybe we can come up with something a little better. But I mean, he's going to be, like I said, he's that leading personality.
That's a question. That's why you're here. That's why we hired you, is to come up with a nickname for Luke Montgomery. Next time you talk to him, we can figure this out and we can put it in a headline or something.
Well, that was part of the interview process. And I think you and Gabe were like, all right, this guy's got nicknames. All right, here we go.
That's right. And the first thing that comes to mind when you're talking, I'm like, okay, so is Luke going to have like an apartment here, like in Columbus? Is he going to be like CJ Hicks, where he's going to just be at every single home game every single week recruiting kids? I wouldn't put it past him, honestly.
Yeah, have him go post up an apartment in Grandview and have him where are the freshmen stayed? Not the Blackwell, that's the team hotel. The Griff. Have him go post up in there, and then boom, he'll be just bringing in 5 stars from all over the place, right?
I think there are quite a few freshmen in the Griff that would love for him to be their roommate. That's like that would be, it would be perfect for Ohio State. But there is so much more to get into, and we're so excited to have Zack joining our staff. But please follow us on Twitter. I'm at Colin Gay 17, and we're at Ohio ST_rivals. What is your Twitter? I don't have it up in front of me.
Yeah, it's Zack ZACK_Carp.
Awesome. Follow him on Twitter. We're gonna have plenty of content here soon. I think we're gonna break down the 2022 class, get his opinions on that, go forward through 2023, and then we're off to the races here. Follow us on Twitter, get on the board. Let's start talking about Ohio State and kind of this process of growth between 2023 and heading into the 2022 spring season. There's plenty more to come. So stay tuned, and we'll see you guys on the board.